This morning we're thankful to have with us one of our own, Dr. Loren Crow. Dr. Loren Crow has been here for about 10 years at NCU. He has studied over in Israel at least 5 different separate occasions. One time he went over there for study, then 4 times he's been on archaeological digs. His expertise in the area of Old Testament. And I appreciate Loren because as we get a chance to hang out every once in a while and have coffee or whatever else, I just know that he's the kind of person who's genuine about his love for study and for academics. I also know that he has a pretty fun sense of humor. I think for many of us, we often don't get tagged just right because you see kind of the outside, but you don't really get a chance to meet people. And so I hope that you at some point in your career here at NCU get a chance to just sit down with Dr. Loren Crow and get to know him a little bit. He's taking the next section in our series here on the story. Would you give a warm welcome to Dr. Loren Crow?
Morning, everyone. I'm a little shy, and I don't crack jokes quite as easily as some other members of my department do. But I do like to have fun, and so if any of you wanted to come and hang out with me and just talk, I would be totally up for that, like Troy said. Today, we're going to be looking at a section of the story that asks about Israel in exile. Now, you've heard already about the stories of Israel's kings, and you've heard that Israel lived under a Judaic monarchy, which we call the Davidic monarchy, and you know that that Israel was divided into Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And you've heard lots of these stories. Today we're talking about a part of the story in the Bible that is different from the one that you might otherwise hear. This is the story of a people that has been devastated. This is the story of a people that used to conceive itself as a nation in God's providential care, but now has had that called into question. This is a people that lives not among its own people worshiping the God that they all know is true, but that lives among a foreign people worshiping other gods. In other words, this is the story of a people that's very much like us. In fact, this is true throughout the Old Testament, and in fact, I think we can make the case that it's true in the New Testament as well, that the Bible's stories are not somebody else's stories. They are our story. This is the story of how God brought our people out of Egypt and gave us a new land. This is the story of how God saved us from our enemies. This is the story of how God blessed us with fertility and how we abused that blessing and came under God's judgment. Not them, we. So, after all of this judgment takes place, the judgment takes place, the Babylonians invade. Who knows where Babylon is? Yes? Any of you Iraq war veterans probably know where Babylon is. Babylonia is in Mesopotamia, what we now call Iraq, or as we say in Arabic, Iraq. Babylonians invade Jerusalem, not only invade the people that God gave us, not only invade the land that God gave us, but in fact destroy it, burn our fields, lay waste to our crops, take our daughters and our sons for their slaves, devastate our theology, raze our temple, and that's R-A-Z-E, tear it down to its foundations. And there's a whole lot of people in Judah and Israel right now who are asking themselves, has God abandoned us? Or maybe the God of Babylon is stronger than our God. Or Maybe God has decided to just, done with Israel, I'm going to go make a covenant with somebody else. There are lots of people in Israel who are seriously considering this question. So how do we make sense of this for ourselves? Well, I think we also have a situation that's very much like this. Consider what it's like to be an American. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, I'll come clean, I'm a Democrat. But it doesn't matter to me which of those you are. It seems to me that you probably got disappointed in the last election if you voted. Doesn't really matter who you voted for. There were some things that you didn't get, and some things maybe that you felt very passionate about. Our world is not a world that, for all appearances, seems, maybe except for the sunshine today. Thank you all for coming, by the way. You could have been out playing Frisbee. But this world, for all appearances, does not seem to be governed by a God who is sovereign, does it? It's easy to wonder that. It's easy for me to wonder it anyway. Is God really in control? Today we're looking at 3 stories from the book of Daniel. And Troy asked me to teach you about one story from the book of Daniel. He said, it didn't really matter which one I chose because what we really wanted to do was explore the book of Daniel. I said, okay, foolishly, because then it came down to choosing which part of Daniel I wanted to teach about, and I couldn't do it. So I'm going to teach you 3 stories from the book of Daniel today. And the subtitle of this talk, I call it Living as an Exile in a Strange Land, which is to say, how we can live as exiles in a strange land. Or, how to keep your faith when everything seems to fall apart. I know that some of you experience this. In fact, this is not just the Bible's story, this is your story for many of you. I know that it's my story. This is King Nebuchadnezzar. This is from a boundary stone set up when the king decided to give some of his conquered land to a local king who had helped him conquer the land. He said, oh, thanks for your help. Here, have some land. They carved this stone with a representation of King Nebuchadnezzar seated as a god would be seated. If I were to show you the rest of the stone, you'd see that not only is Nebuchadnezzar enthroned upon a divine throne, but he's also got cherubim in front of him, kind of mystical animals that are half human, half other things. So the first story that I want to tell you is a story about solidarity. A story about trying to live among a foreign people while acknowledging that our people back home are in pretty sorry shape. The story goes like this. Daniel and his friends are taken in the first wave of Nebuchadnezzar's invasion of Judah. They're taken, that is, before the temple gets destroyed, before Judah is actually brought into the Babylonian Empire. They're taken as exiles to Babylon. How does Nebuchadnezzar choose them? They're the richest people around. They're the most educated people around. In other words, they are the cream of the crop. Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, I'd like some guys like this in my court. He says, I'm going to take them into my household and train them for 3 years, teaching them Akkadian. If you can learn the Akkadian language in 3 years, you're pretty talented. Teaching them the Akkadian language, and they will then become things like translators of Judean documents into the local dialect, and so on. So he takes these boys, presumably, we don't know how old they are, but presumably they're your age or so, takes them into his household and says, not, these guys are going to be my slaves, but I'm going to treat these guys royally. I'm going to give them the best food. In fact, I'm going to give them the same food I eat. Not only that, I'm going to let them drink the best wine. They're going to drink the same wine that I have on my table. Now imagine this. Imagine yourself, most of you maybe are from small towns, yeah? Some of you not. But imagine yourself coming from Drain, Oregon. Okay? Coming from Drain, Oregon, and you are taken into Windsor Castle and made part of the court. You've got your own servants. You've got daily food with the queen. You've got, this is quite a shift. Imagine how overawed these three bumpkins are from the little town, maybe 10,000 people, Jerusalem. They're brought to the big city, they're brought to the court. And they are wined and dined, except, what does Daniel do? Anybody know? Daniel says, I feel like it would be a travesty for me to eat this rich food and drink this wine, and so I'm not going to do it if I can help it. He goes to the chief steward and says, I tell you what, I really don't want to eat this royal food. What I'd really like to do instead is just, if you could go out to the field and pick me some wild lentils. You know what lentils are? You had lentil soup? It's basically like a masticated pea. Make me some wild lentils and give me water to drink. And the guy says, no, I can't do that for you. Nebuchadnezzar wants me to feed you richly. He wants you healthy. He wants you learning. I'm not going to give you this split pea soup every day for the rest of your life. And Daniel says, well, I tell you what, try us out for 10 days and see if we aren't just as healthy as everybody else is. So the steward says, all right, I'll try that out. Take that bet. And does it. 10 days later, they are not only as healthy as the other deportees, but they are healthier. This is a miracle. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried eating split pea soup every day for 10 days, but it wouldn't take you very long to be pretty malnourished. It's a miracle that they're kept safe by God's hand. And this is the way that Daniel is portraying it. So why? Now, my question when I first started working on this passage, Daniel says, I would be defiled. I don't want to defile myself by eating this rich food. My question is, what on earth would defile you about eating the king's food? It doesn't say they're asked to eat pork. It doesn't say they're supposed to eat shellfish or catfish or any of the really terrible things. Yes. It doesn't say they're eating any of that stuff. There's no commandment in the Bible that says you can't drink wine or even foreign wine. So why is it that Daniel and his friends reject all of this stuff? The reason that it seems to me is the truth. By the way, there are other answers on this, but the one that makes sense to me is back home in Israel, people's fields have been burned. They're surviving on survival rations. How can we here in Babylon eat this stuff? This is an act of solidarity with the locals. Let me show you just a few passages. Daniel resolved, can you all see those words? I know they're small. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the king's food or the wine he drank, so he sought permission. That's interesting. He doesn't just do it. This Daniel is a humble fellow. He seeks permission to survive on lentils or maybe vegetables or something like that. There are different translations. And he offers this test as a possibility. He survives it, and then they go to present themselves to the king. The king is happy with them, and Daniel and his friends are finally taken, I think we're supposed to imagine at the end of 3 years, they're finally taken into the royal court where they become trusted advisors to Nebuchadnezzar. So the first story in Daniel that I want you to kind of get something out of that relates to how we can live in a world that is foreign. One thing we can do is try to have solidarity with the poor. Now, does that mean that I have to buy my clothes at Salvation Army and I can never have a steak the rest of my life? I hope not. Does it mean this? I'm not sure. It may mean different things for different people. But somehow you need to develop the attitude that says, I'm not in this just for me, I'm in it for somebody else too. An attitude that maintains solidarity with people who don't have life as good as mine. Now, there are lots of other really interesting gems in this story. I don't mean to say that you shouldn't read this. I hope that you will go back and read it, and I'm sure you'll find a million other things that I'm not talking about. But this is one thing that seemed to me really important. Solidarity with those who don't have life so good as ours. I'm tempted to ask for questions, except it's not a class. Chapter 2 tells us the story of a dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. Now, we've set this up in chapter 1 by saying that Daniel and his friends are taken into the royal court and that they are brought into the inner circle. They're part of Nebuchadnezzar's trusted wise men, the book of Daniel calls them. They're taken into his court, and then we're told that King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. This is somebody's modern attempt to represent what Nebuchadnezzar dreams about. If you Google Nebuchadnezzar's dream, you'll come up with some very interesting proposals, including some that will tell you that the last part of it is not yet fulfilled and it's to be fulfilled by Rome or it's to be fulfilled by the United States. Or I'm not going to go into any of that. You can breathe easy. Because my question is, how do we live in exile? Okay? I'm not concerned about predicting the future. Other people can try that if they want to. So Nebuchadnezzar dreams this dream in which he sees a man who has a head of gold and a torso of iron, a, whatever you call this thing, of brass, and then feet of clay. Legs, I guess, is legs of brass and feet of clay. Now, all of this has lots of meanings that have to do with sort of predicting the future for this, and I'm going to bracket all of that out, because what I want to show you instead is how Daniel and his friends live in response to this dream. Here's some selections from the story. It's a long chapter, so I can't give all of it. But to make it short, Nebuchadnezzar dreams this dream, and he decides to make a test. He's not only going to call all of his wise men together and say, here's the dream, tell me what it means. Instead, he's going to test them to see whether they've really got any insight or not, or whether they're just making all this stuff up. So he says, I tell you what, you tell me the dream, and then you can tell me what it means. Any of you ever tried this? It's another demonstration of the miraculous character of Daniel's vision. It's everybody, all the other wise men, right? We're talking about people who have learned a language in which there are over 500 what we would think of as letters. Akkadian language. These guys are skilled people. They are smart. And what Nebuchadnezzar wants, in addition to intelligence, is miraculous communication. He wants to know what God says, or what the gods, he's probably thinking what the gods are saying, right? Okay, so he calls these wise men together and says, tell me my dream, and then you can interpret it for me. Their answer, as you might expect, is, tell us your dream and we'll tell you what it means. We're Freudians. Nebuchadnezzar says, no, I'm not interested in that. I want you to tell me my dream, and then you can tell me what it means. And they can't do it, as you expect. So Nebuchadnezzar says, all right, tomorrow morning we're going to chop off all your heads. News about this reaches Daniel, who is among the wise men, right? He's one of these guys. And he hears that he's going to lose his head tomorrow morning and says, well, wait a minute. Tell the king to let us sleep on it tonight, and then we'll see if we can come up with something. So Daniel and his friends go home. They pray through the night. God tells Daniel in a dream what Nebuchadnezzar's dream was. Daniel goes back to Nebuchadnezzar and says, here's your dream. Here's what it means. Nebuchadnezzar is very impressed by this. But I want to draw your attention to a few features of this story. First of all, Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm going to kill all the wise men. Sorcerers, necromancers, magicians, astrologers. These, from an Israelite point of view, are not good people. Satanists, if you want to think in those terms. We're going to kill all of them. Now, when I first read this, my expectation was, hey, great, all the bad guys are going to get killed. And Daniel's going to come out smelling like a rose. But notice what it actually says. And this is the really important, when the better you read the Bible, the more you learn to pay attention to what it actually says. Daniel comes to the king and says, don't kill all those wise men. Have mercy on them. I'll tell the king what it means. So Daniel does this and says, the mystery about which you've inquired, you, O king, about which you've inquired, from the wise men, exorcists, magicians, diviners, they can't tell you anything. Because this is information that is from God. It is only God who can reveal the truth to you. So you've got a contest set up between the magicians of the Babylonian kingdom and Daniel and his God. So why is Daniel prepared to do this? Notice this third red mark here. It's so that the meaning should be made known to you, O king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. Why does God want to communicate through Daniel? Because God cares about who? Nebuchadnezzar. Now we're going to see that even farther later on in the story, because Nebuchadnezzar not only receives the divine message from Daniel, but then glorifies God as a result. Truly, he says, your God must be the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealer of mysteries. Do you hear how this faithfulness on the part of Daniel produces not repentance, because the next story is going to tell us that, in fact, Nebuchadnezzar has not repented, but something like enlightenment. How do we live in a world that is not our home, in a world where we're just passing through, living as aliens? How do we live in that world? We live by being committed to the flourishing and well-being of the people in that world. Do they have to convert for me to care about them? No. They will convert because I care about them. Be a blessing to the heathens. This is what God told Abraham, isn't it? I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you I will curse, and your name will be a blessing. Third story. Nebuchadnezzar apparently is not all that bright of a guy, because right after all of this has happened, he's learned that the God of heaven is the only God. He decides that he's going to make an idol. Not just any idol, maybe 90 feet tall, gold. And he's going to put it in the middle of the city square, and he's going to leave it there. And then whenever the band starts to play, everybody has to fall down and worship this idol. It's an image of himself. I myself wouldn't be very comfortable with people bowing down to an image of me. I don't like pictures of myself. But Nebuchadnezzar wants this. He's got this image, and he demands that whenever, you see this list, whenever you, I didn't put the list on, it's too long. Oh, there it is. It's the second paragraph. Whenever I make the sound of the horn, the pipe, the zither, the lyre, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all other types of instruments, then you have to fall down and worship. It's kind of an interesting thing. In Jewish tradition and in Near Eastern tradition as a whole, Muslim tradition too, when you worship is not mainly by standing up, it's mainly by falling down. Kneeling. Later on in Daniel, we're told that Daniel kneels, or even to put your face on the ground, prostrate yourself. You have to fall down and worship this idol. Now we've got a story of the three young men that came along with Daniel. Daniel plays a small role in this story, but not much of one. These three guys tell Nebuchadnezzar, we're not going to do it. And some of the local wise men who, these are the same guys, presumably, that Daniel has just saved from heads on the chopping block, right? These guys start plotting against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these three Jewish young men. Start plotting against them and saying, look, Mr. King, these guys are not falling down and worshiping your statue like you've commanded. And now, what are you going to do with them? Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm going to throw them in a fire that is 7 times hotter than anything you can imagine. So hot, in fact, that the people who throw these guys into the fire get burned themselves and die. Throws them in, and then Nebuchadnezzar looks in, and he says, let's see, didn't we throw 3 men into the fire? And his servants say, yeah, we threw 3 men in. He said, but look, I see 4 men walking around. And one of them is like a Ben Adam, a son of man. It's not son. It's one of them is like a son of God, and so the tradition on how that verse gets interpreted, you can imagine people go crazy on it. Nebuchadnezzar's point is there's a 4th guy in there, and apparently he's saved them from the fire. So they bring the 3 guys out, they douse the fire, they bring them out, and then here are these 3 guys standing in front of Nebuchadnezzar again, and look what Nebuchadnezzar says. Now I know that your God is powerful to save. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel to his servants, who, trusting in him, flouted the king's decree at the risk of their own lives, rather than serve or worship any god but their own. Now, having the third way that it seems to me that we can think about these stories teaching us what it's like to live as an exile is because our kingdom is not the kingdom of this world. Therefore, we can speak the truth to power. We don't have to worry about the fact that this fire is coming, because that's not the thing that's ultimately real for us. You see what these 3 guys say to Nebuchadnezzar? We have no need to answer you on this matter, For if it must be so, our God is able to save us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will save us from your power, O king. But even if he doesn't, catch this, we can't be absolutely sure that God is going to save us. Even if he doesn't, even then, we're not going to bow down and serve your little idol that you've made. That is a kind of an inner spiritual strength that can only come if the true God that you worship insists that he's to be the only one who's worshipped. Now, I know that if I were to ask you guys, what are you tempted to worship that is not God? I bet each of us could come up with 20 things within the first minute. What am I tempted to worship? I'm tempted to worship the particular way that I'm used to singing songs in church. I'm tempted to worship my specific interpretation of a biblical passage as opposed to the God who is declared true by this biblical passage. I'm tempted maybe to worship the Bible as opposed to the God to whom the Bible points. I'm tempted to worship the Democratic Party or Barack Obama or whatever. I think these things are going to save me. So this story is very powerful in teaching that if you will devote yourself to the true God, all of these other things, they may be important, but they don't have the kind of ultimate importance that God does. We can speak the truth to power. So 3 ways that the exiles stayed faithful and that it seems to me we can learn from. This, by the way, is a manuscript illustration of Daniel in the lion's den, which was a story that we didn't talk about. It's another one of those that we might have done. It's the same kind of story where Daniel says, I'm going to do what's right, and you can throw me in the den of lions if you want to. First thing, they found specific behavioral ways to stay connected to your people. Now, I don't know, for some of you, you may not feel like God is with you. I feel that way a lot myself. You may not feel like you're a very good Christian. You may not feel like being able to pray. I'm here to tell you that if you can't make it, fake it till you make it. Keep going to church. You can read your Bible. God will eventually show up. But you may be called for a while to live in exile. Second, they adopt an attitude of service. It's not about, am I going to heaven? It's about, is my neighbor going to heaven? If you can start thinking of your salvation not in terms of for your own eternal security or however you want to think of that, start thinking of it in terms of you being a messenger to God into the world. As the Father sent me, says Jesus, so I send you. What did the Father send Jesus to do? Third, they trusted in God's sovereignty and providence. Now, those are big theological words. Basically, it means God is in control. I don't have to be the one that's in control. I can trust that God is in control. You want to throw me into a furnace? Fine. If God wants to save me, He can. If He doesn't, I can still do what's right. This attitude that says God can be in control even when I'm not is an attitude that lets me go with the flow. It lets me live a life that is glorifying to God, even if I don't understand how it all fits together, I can trust. Now, can we really trust that? I think so. If God really is God, it makes sense that this God is in control. So these three attitudes seem to me to be absolutely essential for living a life in a world where it seems like everything is spinning out of control. The temple is destroyed. I don't know how to be Christian. I don't even know how to be a decent person. Is there something I can rely on? I can rely on the mercy and faithfulness of God. Thank you.
Go ahead and stand. And why don't we just use what Dr. Crow said to us for our benediction today. May you go and live in solidarity with the poor. May you be committed to the flourishing of others, even those different from you or your enemies. And what's the last one? May you speak truth to those in power, even if it costs you greatly. Everybody say amen? Amen. Grace and peace be with you.